What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me. This is today's design, where you can download the palette that's in the description down below and follow along with the exact same colours. And the canvas size for today is 2000 by 2000 pixels. And with all that said, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is, once we've got the palette for today, we've got a selection of two different colours here that we're going to use for the background. Now you should always be on the empty layer that's in the file when you first start. So we're going to go back up to our colours. We're going to grab this purple here on the far right hand side of the second row. And then we're going to drag that onto the screen like so. And then the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and, with our brush set to the monoline brush under calligraphy, we are going to change our colour to the third row, the very far right colour. And then we are going to draw a horizontal line straight across the middle of the screen. Hold your pen on the screen and pop your finger as well so you can get a perfectly horizontal line. And then we're going to drag the colour in to this space here. Now if your colour threshold at the top there is 43.5%, it may do the same thing as mine. If you drag it all the way to the left hand side, eventually you'll get a 50-50 split at the top there until we get these two colours. Then let's go ahead and blur those two colours. So let's go up to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer. And then from right to left, blend those colours together. And something around about 65% looks pretty good. Get a nice blend between the two colours. And hit your adjustments when you're done. Now let's go ahead and add in our first element to this style. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. Let's create a new layer. We're going to switch our colour out to the first colour on the first row, and then we're going to go and adjust our monoline brush up to 100%. And then we are going to draw a horizontal line across the screen and pop your finger on the screen as well, and then you'll get a perfectly nice horizontal line. And we want to end up with something as wide as sort of that. And then we want to grab our cursor, and then with the uniform option selected and snapping turned on, we can drag that then into the middle of our canvas and hitting the orange line down the middle to let us know we're in the center, as well as I'm just positioning it so the tip of our monoline there is hitting the orange horizontal line as well. And then tap on the cursor when you're done, and we've got our floor for today's design. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and work on the tent and then build all the structure around it. So let's create a new layer, and let's actually create another new layer as well, so that we can swipe on both of them and group them together. And you can rename your group if you want, and I'm going to call mine tent. And then on the bottom layer out of the two, we're going to go ahead and change our color out, and we're going to switch it out to the third color on the second row. And we're going to go to our brush, our monoline brush, because this is what we're going to use for the majority of this. I'm going to reduce it down to about 20%, and zooming in, we want to create a triangle in the middle. Now what we can do here is we're going to go up to our settings and our actions. We're going to go to our canvas, and we're going to go on edit drawing guide and turn that on. Then we're going to edit the drawing guide, and we're going to use the symmetry option down here. And you want to make sure if you tap on options, you're on the vertical version of it, and then hit done when you're done. And you'll end up with this vertical line running straight down the middle, which means anything you paint on one side gets perfectly reflected on the other side. That way we can make sure our tent is nice and symmetrical. And then we're going to draw in our tent. So you can start at the top if you like on the line, and then draw in your tent down, and then you can position it as wide as you like. Something roughly like that is good. And don't worry about the base, because that's going to be hidden behind our floor here. We're going to join those two lines together so that we can drag and drop our colour in like so. And then zooming out, we're going to go ahead and just grab our floor layer before we move any further and just drag it above our tent so we can get an idea for proportions a little bit more. And I'm just going to grab my cursor now, and with the uniform option selected, just scale that down a little bit more and position it again perfectly on that orange line running down the middle, and hit the cursor when we're done. And then zooming in, we can go ahead and add in some nice textures into our tent and some layers. So let's go ahead and on the layer above our base, we're going to tap on that and turn on drawing assist, so everything we do is also reflected on the other side. We're going to get our colours, and let's start here at the top. Let's use this first colour on the second row, and then we're going to go back to our layers and just make sure this layer is clipped to our design. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start just here, and we're going to go across like so. Hold your pen, but we're just going to angle that line so it just tails off just before it gets to the bottom. That way then we can go ahead and fill in this space here and just the tip of our tent like so, and then we should have a nice little bit of a tailing off bit of brighter yellow on the top there. The next thing we're going to do is kind of repeat that process. We're going to go to the base layer of our tent. We're going to create a new layer, and also remember to tap on that layer and turn on the drawing assist as well. Then we're going to go up to our colors and switch it out to the second color on the second row. And then we're going to do the same sort of principle really. We're going to start a little bit further down this time because we're creating a shadow underneath this lighter section that we created. So something roughly here, and then drag that across. And then because you hold your pen at the end, you can start to angle that and create that nice little under shadow such as that. And then we're done with that top area. Now let's go ahead and go up to our colors. We're going to switch it out then to the third color on this row, the top row. Then we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create another new layer. We're going to then tap on that layer and make sure it's drawing assisted so that we can reflect it on both sides. And I'm actually going to reduce the brush size a little bit now, just to about 5% potentially. What we're going to do is we're going to start in the center and create a nice arc. And then starting roughly here, we're just going to draw in an arc like so. Hold your pen at the end, and then you can start to change the angle of that if you want. Something roughly like that is pretty good. And then just join your arcs up at the bottom so that you can drag and drop the purple into that space and just tidy up any gaps that you may have left. And then just like we did with this darker color here for the shadow, we're going to do the same process. So we're going to go to our layers, and then on the base layer of the tent, let's create another new layer and also tap on that and make sure it's drawing assisted. We're going to switch it out to our shadow color, so the second color on the second row. And then from the point up here again, we're just going to create another arc, but this sort of flares out to roughly here. And then we're just going to create a downward flick like so. And then draw in that gap here and just fill that space in like so. Just do it manually this time. And then we should end up with a nice revealing open part of the tent. If we zoom out, we've got some nice little layers in there that we can now add our shadow to. So what we're going to do for the shadow is we're going to go up to our layers, we're going to create a new one right at the top in our tent group and make sure it's clipped. So tap on it and make sure you hit clipping mask. We're then going to grab our shadow color, which I've placed over here and isolated because we're going to use it multiple times throughout this design. We're going to tap on that shadow color, and then continuing with the monoline brush, we're using our vertical line down the middle. We're simply just going to tap on that line, draw a straight line all the way down and pop your finger on the screen as well so you get a nice vertical line. And then all we're going to do is just draw in the outside shape of our tent and then across the bottom as well to create a nice triangle shape, and then drag and drop your color in like so and just tidy up any tiny little gaps you may have. And then all we're going to do is simply go to our layers. We're going to tap on that layer and the N, and then we're going to lower the opacity down all the way down to 35%, and then we'll have our tent that's now nicely got its casted shadow on one side. The next thing we're going to work on then is some bushes down here at the front, just in front of our tent as well as also behind it. So let's go to our layers now. Let's collapse our tent group down because we're done with that for the moment, but we want to create some bushes that are in front of it, so we need to create a new layer above. And then we're going to go ahead and with the same color selected, we're going to increase our brush size all the way back up to 100%. And for these bushes, we're going to go ahead and create some really minimalistic ones. And all you want to do is sort of tap and tap and tap until you can create some sort of random little bush shape here, like so. Just tapping away until you create a sort of shape roughly like that. And we're going to do the same on the right hand side as well. So create some maybe different shaped bushes, maybe try and do some differentiation between the two sides. Then we're going to go ahead, and once you've done that, we're going to do another new layer for bushes in behind that. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to drag it now underneath our tent. Now everything we'll create at this point onwards will all be behind the tent. So then we're going to go ahead and change our color out, and we're going to change it to the third color on the first row. And if you want to, you could reduce your brush size down to say 70%, so you get some slightly smaller circles than this. And then we can go ahead and do the same sort of process, just tapping away, creating some bushes, but we want to ideally link up close to this bush. So you can see I went all the way across there, and then I'll just fill in the gaps until this bush starts to just sort of sink in behind this one here. So just creating some nice bumpy lumpy bushes like so. And then let's zoom out and have a look, and then do the same on the other side as well. So starting here, we're just going to tap away, and I've gone from left to right this time, and just creating some bushes. So you can go ahead and obviously go back and sort of smooth out your bumps and lumps in your bushes like so until you're happy with how they look. And you should end up with something roughly like that, where you've got our nice contrast between the two purples. Next thing we're going to do is create our tree, and the first thing we're going to do is create one and then do all the shadows and highlights to it, and then we're going to go ahead and duplicate it and put it in multiple positions. So what we want to do is we want to continue with this purple we've got selected now. We're going to go up to our layers and we're going to go to our background gradient that we had. Let's create a new layer, and let's actually create a second one as well so that we can swipe on both of them and group them together. Let's rename this group tree, so let's stay nice and organized. And then on the bottom one out of the two layers, we're going to go ahead and we're going to reduce our monoline brush down to, say, let's get something nice and small, maybe around about 5%. And what we're going to do here is using the drawing guide, so let's tap on that layer again and go back to drawing assisted to make sure it's turned on. We're going to draw in the first part of our tree. Now, just to explain the tree is essentially 4 triangles all duplicated on top of one another, and so you create that sort of Christmas tree kind of look to it. And all we're going to do is draw in one triangle to start with. So I've just put my pen on the top of the line there and then created my first triangle, and then link that line up perfectly horizontally and pop your finger on the screen to make sure it is nice and horizontal. Drag your colour in so you've got your first triangle, and again just fill in any tiny little gaps you may have. And then what we're going to do is on that same layer we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out of the two, I'm going to grab our cursor, we're going to drag it down, hitting that orange line in the middle so we know we're nice and central. But we're also then going to grab, with the uniform option selected, the bottom right node and scale that up. And essentially we want to try and make sure that every triangle we add gets slightly wider as we go down, so we create that nice pyramid sort of tree look. That's our second triangle. Let's go back to our layers. Let's swipe on that layer to the left and duplicate it one more time. The bottom one out of the two, let's grab our cursor. Let's grab that bottom node first this time. Make it a bit bigger and then drag it down like so. And you want to try and make sure that the points here, the gap you made here between this first triangle and the second triangle, is the same sort of gap that you leave here between these two as well, just for consistency. And then tap on the cursor when you're done. And we're just going to do that one more time, and this essentially is the very base of the tree. So we're going to go ahead and on that bottom triangle, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out of the two, just grab your cursor and you can either drag it straight down if you want. You don't need to scale this one up until you get a slightly smaller gap this time, and hit the cursor when you're done. And that's our basis of our tree. We can go ahead now and we can go to our layers and let's pinch all 4 of those together and we have our tree shape. We can go ahead now and turn off the drawing assist as well, so we can tap on that layer and turn off the drawing assist. Let's grab our cursor and position this over here on the left hand side, and we want to leave a gap just behind the tent so we can fit 2 smaller ones in here, so roughly something out here. And maybe I will reduce the size of this ever so slightly down, just so that we end up with an overall height something roughly like that is good, and into this position here. And then what we're going to do is, in our group for our tree, we should have an empty layer. If you don't, just create a new one. And on this layer, we're going to tap on it and you're going to use the option of clipping mask. So everything we now draw in this layer has to be painted within the boundaries of our tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab our colors. We're going to grab this color here on the far right hand side of the top row. So we've got the 5th color in, and then zoom in. And what we're going to do is just the same as we did here with the highlight of the tent. I'm going to start slightly outside of the triangle and then hold my pen down to get a nice straight line, and I can just position that until I hit the tip of the triangle like so at the very top, and then fill in that little gap, and we've added a nice little highlight on this left hand side. And we're going to repeat that process a couple of times until we've done all these 3 sort of peaks here sticking out. So out here, draw that line in, and because we don't have a point to go to, you kind of want to just position it so it runs into the corner here like so, and then just fill in that little gap. And then the same thing we're going to do here is we're going to start out here and then just position it so it runs out just into that corner like so, and fill in any little gap that you may have. And then zooming out, we've got a lovely tree now highlighted on the left hand side. But we also need to add our shadow, so let's go ahead and go to our colors. Let's grab our shadow color, and then we're going to go ahead and go to that layer and create a new one that we were just working on. Tap on it and use the option of clipping mask, and then just like we did before kind of with the tent, we're going to start right at the top and draw a straight line straight down the middle from the peak of the tree all the way down. Pop your finger on the screen like so, and then at your start point you can just simply draw all the way around and link up to your shape here, just so that you can drag and drop the darker colour in like so. And we've got our tree now with the same matching sort of highlight scheme as well as the shadows as well. And now we've got that tree. If you're happy with it at this point, you can either continue to duplicate the group, or you can simply tap on that group and flatten it. Then we'll end up with one singular layer for our tree, and we can go ahead and duplicate this now 3 more times. So we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Let's grab our cursor and just move that all the way over to the right hand side until you think you've roughly matched it up to where the other tree was in terms of distance from the tent. So that looks good to me, and if you keep snapping turned on, you'll get the blue lines to let you know the height of this tree matches the height of this tree. And then when you're done, tap on the cursor. Next, let's go ahead and on the bottom one out of the 2, swipe that to the left and duplicate the bottom one. Let's then grab our cursor, but this time we're going to scale it down just a little bit and position it in behind our tent, roughly like that. That's a pretty good little gap there we've got. And then going up to our layers, and that smaller one we just created, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. And then the same process of dragging it horizontally, grab your cursor and then drag it across horizontally until you get those lovely blue lines to let you know all is nice and symmetrical height wise. And you should be able to let go roughly around about there and tap on your cursor. And now we've got our miniature forest around our tree and our bushes now in the front. And for final sort of details, we're going to add in our mountains just to fill up this top area. So what we're going to do for the mountains is we're going to go ahead and with our next color, which is the 4th color on the top row, we're going to go up to our layers, and again we're working backwards now in terms of the design. So we're going to go back down to our gradient layer for our background sky. Going to create a new layer. We're then going to go ahead and continue with the monoline brush, and mine is still set to, let's go to 5% just to be sure we're all on the same page. We are going to go ahead and tap on that layer and turn on the drawing assist. And we're going to create 2 slightly smaller mountains on either side and then a big mountain in the middle. So what we were going to do is we're going to start with the big mountain first so we can get an idea for perspective, and then create our smaller ones on either side. And for this, because we've just turned on the drawing assist, the same process as our tent and our trees, we're going to start in the middle of the design. So somewhere where you're happy with the height. So roughly here is good for me. I'm going to draw a straight line down and then just position it how wide you want the mountain. Roughly around about that is good with me. And I'm actually going to go a little bit further than the base of our design so you can just see the process afterwards. And then go ahead and just drag that across, link your shape up, and then drag your color in like so. And then you can just position that slightly further up so that you can get your first mountain shape in there. So now we've got our mountain in the middle. The first thing we're going to go ahead and do is create that half shadow. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and use the option of clipping mask. And then we're going to go ahead and change our brush color to the shadow color on the far right hand side here, isolated as our shadow. And it doesn't matter what your monoline is set to. You want to draw a straight line straight down the canvas and hold your pen at the end to get a straight line, but pop your finger on the screen to get a perfectly straight line. And wherever your end point is, roughly down here for me, I'm going to go all the way around, link up to my start point, and then drag and drop that color into that space. And then I'm going to go ahead and lower the opacity of that layer by tapping on the N, lowering that all the way down to 25%. Then I'm going to go ahead and on the mountain base layer, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to change my color now to the 5th color on the top row. And my brush size is still going to stay very small at about 1% for this one. And we're going to draw in our snow. So we're going to go ahead and starting outside the layer, because it's clipped to the mountain, we can start outside and draw in some really cool jagged sort of snow on the peak of this mountain. And it doesn't matter, you can add as much or as little detail as you want. It also doesn't have to necessarily be symmetrical in any way. You can create some really cool jagged sort of snow points at the top of this mountain, and making sure you every single time hit the point of the last line that you drew, and that will keep things nice and tidy and nice and symmetrical. And then just point that out there like so. And then what you want to do is from your end point here, as I'm drawing in, you want to go all the way around and link up to your start point, and then drag and drop that color in like so, and then just fill in any tiny little gaps if there is any at the peak of the snow. And then we've got that in place. Let's add in some subtle shadows underneath the snow, which really helps it stand off of the background. So let's go to our layers. Let's create another new layer from the base. So tap on the base and then create a new layer. We're going to go up to our colors and switch it out to our shadow color, which is this one here on that second row. And then for these ones, we're going to create those sort of diagonal lines in the same angle every time. So I'm going to go like that, for example, and then fill in that gap. And that line and that angle is something I need to match now to all the other points of our snow. And then just creating all of these diagonal lines like this, and then filling in any gaps like that, and also out here too. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our layers and lower the opacity of that layer down to 30% so that we've got a nice little undershadow underneath our snow. And the only thing I want to also do is add in the diagonal sort of shadow that runs out and gets thinner, just like we did with the top of the tent here. So I'm going to start roughly out here, and I'm going to create a diagonal line that runs all the way down, holding my pen down, just the same as we did with the tent. It gets really thin and then actually disappears completely, and you'll end up with a little triangle here that you just need to fill in and drag and drop that colour in. Still on that same shadow layer we added for the snow as well. And then we've got a lovely mountain now. We've got that half tone either side, as well as a nice little shadow. Then what we're going to do is let's go up to our layers, and what we can do to save some time, we can swipe on all 4 layers. So you should have your shadow layer, your snow layer, your under shadows, and the actual base layer of the mountain. Let's then pinch them all together, and then we're going to swipe on that layer and duplicate it. And then on that top one out of the 2, we're going to grab our cursor, and let's scale it down with the uniform option till we get a slightly smaller version of what we had before. I'm going to drag mine across, but until the right hand edge of this box for the mountain hits that orange line running down the middle of the canvas. That'll let me know everything's nice and symmetrical, and then when I flip it on the other side, I can also use that on the opposite side as well. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go up to my layers. I'm going to swipe on that layer and duplicate it, and I'm going to just simply grab my cursor and drag it all the way across. And the same rule, make sure I hit that orange line straight down the middle, as well as hitting the blue lines to make sure that we're nice and horizontal from the other one. And then tap on your cursor when you're done. Now we've got our mountains in the background. The final step is to add in some floating clouds and a sun as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of our layers. Now if you want to, if you're struggling for layers, you can pinch your trees together. You can even pinch your mountains together, so like that, as well as like that, and that will save you some layers if you're starting to run out. What I'm going to then do is create a new layer above our trees and our mountains, and we're going to go ahead and switch our color out to white by double tapping in the top left hand corner of our colors. And just like we did with the bushes, we're going to increase the brush size up to roughly, let's go to about 70%. And we're going to draw in some clouds. Now how we're going to do that is we're going to create sort of the top half of the cloud by creating these lovely little puffy sort of shapes in the sky, and then creating roughly a flat edge at the bottom. And then we're just going to go up to our eraser, tap on it again, and make sure you're using the monoline. I'm going to increase my brush size up to, I don't know, 30%. It shouldn't really matter, but I'm going to draw a straight line straight through the middle of that cloud and put my finger on the screen to make sure it's a perfectly horizontal line, and then just erase this bit of excess at the bottom. And then you should end up with a nice floating cloud that matches the same sort of aesthetic as the rest of the design. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to add 3 of those in. So I'm going to grab my cursor first of all and position this where I want it. I want it to roughly sit across the top of this mountain. So something like that's pretty good. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer just so I can move them all freely afterwards. I'm going to create a new cloud up here roughly. So I'm going to switch back to my brush and I'm going to paint in our big dots, creating those big fluffy clouds. And I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger compared to the one I just created. And I'm going to go to my eraser and simply just draw in that horizontal line. Put your finger on the screen as well, and then get rid of any excess. I'm pretty happy with the positioning of that. I'm going to add one more cloud over here on the right hand side. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers, create a new layer, grab our brush, and we're going to draw in a slightly smaller one this time. I'm going to go for quite a thin one. Now your clouds may vary. I'm going to draw in quite a thin one here, and maybe with a couple of larger bumps. And zooming in, you'll be able to see the shape that I've created, but I'm going to simply grab my eraser and just draw all the way through that horizontal with the eraser, popping my finger on the screen, and then get rid of all of this excess down here. So I've got a nice skinny cloud there sat around the tip of the other mountain. we've got 3 varying different clouds there. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layers. Let's pinch all 3 clouds together again to save on layers, so pinch them like so. Let's add in a nice little shadow from them as if it's been casted from the sun that we're about to add. So let's swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out of the 2, let's tap on it and invert it. We should end up with some black clouds now. Then we're going to go ahead and go up to our adjustments. We're going to go to motion blur and layer, and then we're going to drag in a diagonal fashion, and I'm going to go up to roughly, you can see at the top there, let's go for about 15% or as close to, and then grab your cursor and then drag it in a diagonal bottom right fashion, the same line that you kind of drew in a second ago. And then let's lower those clouds all the way down to roughly around about 14% on the opacity. And we should end up with some nice floating clouds at the top there, really bringing them off of the design as well, making them sit nice and front and center. And let's add in our sun finally before we reflect everything underneath. So let's go to our layers and create a new one. Let's drag it above our clouds as well, just to keep everything nice and tidy. Let's then go to our colors, and our sun color is down here in the bottom left, the very first color on the 3rd row. Let's go to our brush library and continuing with the monoline brush. Let's just simply draw in a circle up here. Hold in your pen to get an ellipse, but pop your finger on the screen to get a perfect circle, and then just fill in that center like so. And it's up to you at this point. You can either leave it like that, or I'm going to go ahead and swipe on that sun, duplicate it, and the bottom one out of the 2, I'm going to go up to my adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and just blur that out a little bit, roughly up to about 12% there, just to create a nice little glow from our sun in the sky there. So now we've got all of our camping scene, everything together, we can go ahead and reflect it in the water underneath. Now if you want to, you can go ahead and position this potentially in a different area if you want to. So what I mean by that is we can go ahead and go to our layers. What we need to do though is we need to go ahead and swipe on all of the layers, excluding the background gradient. We're going to hit group, and then we're going to collapse that group down. Because what we can do now is we can grab our cursor and position this where we want it. So I want to move mine down because the reflection is not going to be the full height of this design. So I want it to sit pretty much smack bang in the middle, but slightly higher then. So something roughly like that is good. I'm then going to go up to my layers. I'm going to do a little trick here so we can, rather than duplicate this group because it may affect users with different iPads and might not have enough layers, we're going to turn off the gradient in the background, and we're going to turn off the background color. So we'll be left with this shape here and no background. And then what we're going to do is we're going to swipe with 3 fingers down. We're going to go to copy all, and we're going to swipe with 3 fingers again, and we're going to go to paste. And that will give you a sort of box here. And if we check out our layers and turn on those 2 layers, so the gradient, and we can turn on the background, it doesn't matter, we should have a new layer right at the top here that if I grab my cursor and I flip it vertically, we should see that we've actually got 2 of them. And let's just drag this underneath like so, perfectly down, so you get that orange line running through. And what we did in the very first bit with the monoline brush is you want to make sure that your land sort of perfectly matches up here, so it's a perfect sort of rounded shape that matches up to the original line that we drew. And then tap on the cursor when you're done, and we've got our lovely reflection there. And then what we can go ahead and do is we need to drag that underneath our group of all of our layers that we created above. Let's go ahead and lower the opacity down until we're happy with the subtle reflection in the ground or the water underneath. So 25% is what I'm happy with. And then all I'm going to do is simply tap on that layer and use the option of mask. And then a mask gives you the option to show and hide. Now everything that's white on that layer mask will show everything of the design. But if we change our color out to black, black hides. So if we go up to our brush library and we go to airbrushing and soft brush, and my brush size is set to 18-19%, and we make sure we go to that layer and we're on the layer mask, we can start to erase without actually erasing. So we can go from left to right, and fade out just the very tip of the reflection down here, so the very mountain peak, and just leave in a really nice soft reflection. And I've just added in a couple of extra strokes there just to really fade that out. And then if I go up to my spanner, let's turn off the drawing guide so we don't see that line straight down the middle anymore. And let's pinch with 2 fingers. I can zoom in as well and tap with 4 to go full screen. We end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, drop a like down below, helps the channel out an awful lot, and hit that subscribe button as well if you'd like some Procreate content every single week. But if you can't get enough Joel Create content, there's a link in the description to my Patreon where you can get exclusive tutorials every single month to Patreon users. Be sure to share your designs with me on Instagram and make sure to tag me in them so I don't lose them in my feed, and I'll be happy to share them to my story. And with all that said, I'll see you in the next one.